The rain smacked against the pavement with so much force I could feel my entire body vibrating with the impact. I didn't own an umbrella or a raincoat, so I just threw the hood from my jacket over my head and speed walked to my car. I fumbled with the keys in my pocket before pulling them out and looking up at the door. As I neared the car door and raised my arm to unlock it, I noticed something in the very top of my vision. There were 2 faint handprints on the window, as well as a smudge in the middle, almost like someone was at some point staring directly into my car. I stepped back in confusion, scratching my head for a few seconds before deciding to temporarily ignore how weird that was and unlocking my car. I stepped inside, taking a sigh of relief from the intense rain. My only 2 friends were absent from school that day, forcing me to talk to someone I barely even knew, Milo. He always seemed to have tons of friends, never having a problem socializing and becoming the center of attention. But the past few weeks, something had changed. He sat next to me in 3rd period, so I noticed that he didn't show up for a few days, but since we weren't friends, I didn't really think to ask about it when he came back. Upon returning, he suddenly seemed out of it. It was almost as if he was constantly thinking about something else, shaking his legs slightly and ignoring everyone around him as if they weren't even there. He seemed to entirely stop participating in classwork and group activities, becoming a social outcast in just a few weeks. That day, with both my friends absent, I decided to look for somewhere other than my usual spot to sit at for lunch. Walking around the cafeteria, I noticed something that shocked me at first. Milo sitting alone. Even though I had watched his gradual decline over the past few weeks out of the corner of my eye, I wasn't really paying attention and still thought of him as one of the most popular, extroverted people in the whole school. I didn't know much about him, and my curiosity rapidly getting the best of me, I decided to take advantage of the opportunity to get to know him. I set my lunch at the seat across from him, hesitantly sitting down. As I began to speak, he gave me a pained, exhausted look as if someone had just twisted a knife into his heart. At first I thought it was because I was trying to interact with him and he just didn't want me to. But as I thought about it, I realized he had looked like that the whole time. I attempted to make mindless small talk with him and get to know more about what he was like before he suddenly erupted into hysterical laughter out of nowhere, gradually trailing off into an intense cough. There was no one sitting anywhere around us in a large radius, although this still managed to get a few head turns. His completely defensive personality quickly shifted to one of shame and sadness, conversing with me a little bit more before getting up out of nowhere and walking away. I noticed as he walked away that each one of his steps seemed forced and jagged as he staggered into the hallway, not coming back for the remainder of lunch. Startled and frustrated, I sat there with my head down, eating my food in silence. The rest of the day was pretty boring until my drive home. As I pulled into the driveway, parking behind my mom's car, I noticed something that chilled me to my core. My palms began to sweat as I turned to look at my glove box. A small clump of thick, long, dark purple hair was sticking out slightly. It looked as though someone was searching through my stuff before quickly shutting the glove box, getting their hair stuck in the process and pulling out a few strands. At first I was terrified that someone might have stolen something as I frantically searched every square inch of my car. Nothing had been stolen. Nothing even seemed out of place. It was as if nothing ever happened. My heart wrenched as a realization hit me like a semi going 100 miles per hour. Milo had thick, long, dyed purple hair, just like the strands in my glove box. I panicked as I threw my car door open and sprinted into my house, locking my car in the process. Had Milo been in my fucking car? I thought to myself. No, that would be insane. We barely even talked to each other once. This had to be a coincidence, right? There's no possible way some random guy would just break into my car, look around at my stuff, and leave like nothing even happened. How would he even know that it was my car? I thought about how insane my initial reaction was, laughing at what seemed like my imagination. One thought wouldn't leave my mind, however. I couldn't manage to think of a single rational explanation for the prints on my window and the hair. I pretended like nothing was wrong, but no matter what I did, I always felt uneasy. The next day at school, my friends still didn't show up. I texted both of them, and both of them texted back, informing me that they were sick and had to stay home for 14 days in quarantine in case they had COVID-19. They could get tested and return to school earlier, but both of their parents refused to do so. During this time, I attempted to get closer to Milo. I told myself that it was simply out of my loneliness that I began talking to him regularly, but deep down I knew the truth. I did not trust him. I wanted to confirm that I was going crazy and that he didn't break into my car the other day. I knew I had to be completely out of my mind, but I couldn't rest until I had completely confirmed this. Milo quickly warmed up to me over the next week, almost instantly latching onto me as if I was the only person still willing to talk to him at all. Something was still off, however. He always acted like his actions required a billion times more effort than they should, always trying to hide some sort of physical pain being inflicted on his body no matter what he did. We sat together at lunch, talking about random stuff as usual and cracking jokes at the expense of various people we both knew, grasping for something different to talk about, something more interesting. I mentioned something I had discovered on the internet. Laughing as I did so, I described to him various people I had heard of online that claimed that they had discovered different methods to become immortal, bragging to everyone that they couldn't die. Milo's eye suddenly stabbed into mine, a serious expression taking over his face as saliva dripped out of his open mouth slightly. His eyes swirled like someone was filling them with liquid despair. Noticing this, I stumbled over my words, gradually stopping my speech entirely when he spoke. "We should go to your house after school today, Ryan," he said, a wide smile rapidly breaking across his entire face. "I think that would be fun." I probably looked like I had just been shot, shock overtaking me as I thought this over. I didn't really know what to think of it, actually, as I stammered out. Actually, my parents and I are going out to dinner to celebrate my mom's birthday today. Sorry." Milo smacked his hand against the table and leaned slightly into me as he stood up, his smile growing even wider than I thought physically possible. "Tomorrow, then!" he yelled, followed by a hideous giggle. "Sure," I spoke, confused, intimidated, and downright frightened. "I guess that works." I didn't have to celebrate my mom's birthday at all. I just didn't trust Milo. The next day, I stepped into the cafeteria, shivering from a mixture of cold and my uncontrollable anxiety. Milo was really starting to mess with my head, and I didn't even understand exactly what I was afraid of. I entered through a different door than usual so that I could see the back of Milo's head as he sat at the table. I did this so that I could observe him a little bit without him noticing. Crouching next to a trash can caused quite a few people nearby to turn and look at me, confused, before turning back to their friends. At first, Milo was fidgeting with his hands and bobbing his leg up and down in a way that seemed less like a nervous habit than it did a distraction from something. His head began drifting in various different directions slightly, as if he was constantly on the verge of passing out but unable to. Eventually, I noticed him scratch harshly at his scalp before attempting to brush it back into place with his fingers, not doing a very good job. He twitched his shoulders sharply and hunched over toward the table in front of him as I could barely make out his jaw moving, seemingly speaking to himself before violently shaking his head and rapidly fixing his posture, as if to bring himself back to reality. Then came the foot tapping, followed by the finger biting, and then the blood trickling down his arm. I jolted up and sprinted over to him, not even looking at the faces around me as I awkwardly did so. Milo twisted his head over to me in an incredibly unnatural move that made my skin crawl as his eyes seemed to shift wildly before he was overtaken by a confused expression. "What the hell, dude?" I said nervously. "Save some room for your chicken sandwich." "Oh, right, he said, not even glancing at his bleeding finger as it seemed to twitch slightly. "What took you so long?" I stammered. "I had to, finish a test in Miss Pierce's. Sorry." I sat down at the table, looking at Milo while waiting intently for his reaction. "Aren't you going to get food?" He chuckled. "The line's about to close." "Oh, shit, you're right," I said, tension breaking as I scrambled to buy lunch. The rest of the lunch period, which was about 10 to 15 minutes, Milo seemed surprisingly normal, a shocking contrast to how he had been acting the entire time. I managed to take my mind off the weirdness and all but forget what happened when he finally asked, "Your house, 3:45? "Sure, sounds great," I instantly reacted, not giving it a second thought. Immediately after speaking those words, I felt my heart sink into my stomach as I processed everything that had occurred since I first talked to him the day my friend stopped showing up to school. I tried my hardest not to let my worry be visible on my face, and I don't think Milo ever noticed, his face lighting up in joy at my response. Then the lunch bell rang. Milo immediately got up and walked out of the room, heading to class. He left me there to think over what I had just done as I bit at my fingernails in fear. "I still don't even know what I'm afraid of specifically," I told myself. "Just ignore it and clean your room." On my way back to class, I pulled out my phone and texted my mom, telling her I was going to have someone over while she was gone. My dad wasn't present, and my mom didn't really care who I had over as long as they were gone by the time she got home around 6:30. I still let her know just in case, but I knew she would be okay with it. After school I drove home, again not noticing anything out of the ordinary in my car, but having a hard time taking my mind off what I found the other day. Once home, I frantically cleaned my room and dusted the entire house, picking up any trash and trying to make everything look at least somewhat clean. My mom would have gone overboard if she knew someone was coming over, but I quickly learned no one really ever noticed the incredibly small things that would make my mom completely freak out. I set up my PlayStation in the living room, assuming he'd want to play some kind of video game, as I realized I had never really talked to him about what we were going to be doing. "I was so distracted I forgot to make plans," I groaned to myself. "Oh, crap, I never even told Milo my address, did I?" I scrambled for my phone to text him, noticing that he was supposed to arrive any minute at my house. As I opened my phone, however, I heard the sound of a car pull into my driveway. I sprinted down the stairs and swung the door open to greet Milo as he exited his car and walked toward the front door. "Hey, Milo!" I shouted awkwardly. He walked toward me in slow, jagged movements that appeared agonizing for him as he waved to me. Before letting him into my house, I swallowed hard and decided to press him about my address. "How exactly," I spoke, "did you get here?" "By driving?" Milo answered as more of a sarcastic question than anything. "Yeah, I got that," I chuckled. "I meant without my address?" I noticed Milo's face drain of color before entirely filling with red as he mumbled to himself. His confidence suddenly returned in a split second, however, as he looked directly into my eyes and stated, You gave it to me at lunch, and I wrote it down, remember? I didn't remember this at all, but I now felt completely out of my mind questioning him. Yeah, I lied. Of course. Sorry, I was just confused about that is all. I let him inside and gave him a short tour of my house before asking him exactly what he wanted to do, mentioning I had a PS4 and listing off the games I owned. Do you have Kool-Aid? He answered. You mean like the packets? Yeah, I guess. Why? Do you want to make some? His eyes lit up with excitement as he again stared directly into my eyes, piercing my soul and looking at the wall behind me. I'll take that as a yes, I grinned. I pulled a pitcher, our only remaining Kool-Aid packet, and a tub of sugar out of our pantry. Milo simply stared at me the entire time as I began to make the Kool-Aid. Pouring the powder into the water, nothing seemed unusual at first. Eventually I could feel that there was some powder stuck at the corner of the pouch, so I tapped it with my finger and turned it onto its side. Some of the remaining powder fell through a tiny hole directly in the middle of the bag. A hole that would have been poked by a person. My thoughts were instantly cut off by Milo loudly offering to add the sugar. I let him do so as I closely monitored him. I then took a large wooden spoon out of a drawer and began mixing the drink together. I grabbed cups, and Milo began pouring the Kool-Aid into them with overly shaky hands. Something I was too scared to ask him about at this point. Staring at each other in silence, I hesitated to drink from my cup, waiting for him to do so first. Clearly noticing this, Milo took a long, dramatic gulp from his cup before exhaling from his mouth deeply and wiping his lips with his arm. Despite this, I was still reluctant to drink as I slowly brought the cup to my lips, my hands now shaking too. I took a big gulp, my brain not even being able to process the taste with how distracted I was before I hesitantly swallowed. Grape is my favorite flavor, Milo said, smiling wickedly as he set his cup down on the counter. Good, isn't it? Sure is, I said, grinning awkwardly. Milo then pulled a chair out from my kitchen table, turned it to face me, and sat in it, appearing completely calm aside from his leg beginning to slightly bob as he stared at me. His eyes felt as though they were violently hacking away at my face as I opened my mouth to speak. What? Vomit shot from my throat with the force of a fire hose as I grabbed my stomach in pain. Collapsing to my knees, I could barely even look at Milo before another horrible, painful stream of puke escaped from my body, this time with disgusting amounts of blood mixed in. Now we can share this experience. I heard Milo speak to himself more than anything as he stood up and walked toward me. My vision collapsed into a static-like darkness as I crumpled to the floor and curled into the fetal position, surrounded by my own blood and vomit. I grew cold and limp, barely hearing Milo utter words that I couldn't understand before I went completely unconscious. The next thing I knew, I was in a dimly lit room, tied to a bed with rope around my wrists and ankles. I coughed violently as I opened my eyes and took in my surroundings. My entire body ached, my head hurting the worst as my brain pounded against my skull. My eyes focused on a form in front of me. Milo. I found myself unable to speak as Milo's eyes flashed with pure excitement. I was interested in you from the beginning, he said in an excited, maniacal tone. I was hoping you'd talk to me. I like your scent. I broke into your car just to smell you. I know that you knew what I did, but you didn't avoid me because of it. That really intrigued me, and then you brought up immortality. You know, I did the same thing once. I looked up how to make yourself immortal and fell down the rabbit hole of weird pseudoscience and ancient mythology, until one day I actually tried a ritual I had seen. I groaned in pure, unbearable pain that only increased with every passing second as I struggled to listen to his words. I made myself immortal, Ryan. The cost of immortality is chronic pain and suffering. You will be mentally and physically tormented until the end of time. I didn't know that. No one ever knows that. That's the trick. Luckily, it turns out it becomes much easier to manage after a couple days, surprisingly. Not to mention, ibuprofen has a mild effect. It still sucks though, to be honest. I can never tell a doctor or family member about it, or a friend. No one will believe me, much less know how to fix my mistake. I immediately tried to kill myself afterwards. I tried to hang myself in my closet. He laughed uncontrollably. Nope! Can't kill yourself when you're immortal! I actually just discovered today, too, that the ritual can raise the dead. Who would have thought, huh? And now, Ryan, you get to share this experience with me. We get to be the same forever.